She was replaced and broken, but she rebuilt her own empire in silence. The sky bore the weight of an impending storm, its heavy clouds painted in hues of charcoal and violet. Somewhere in the quiet hum of the city, a world was ending. It didn't scream or collapse, it simply faded quietly like the final exhale before a long silence. Hana Jisoo stood at the edge of that silence, watching the gates of her former life remain closed to her. They were taller than she remembered, the iron blackened with time and indifference. Beyond them, the house pulsed with life, its windows glowing with warmth she no longer had the right to seek. She had once believed the walls of that estate would shelter her forever. It had been her sanctuary, her stage, the frame of a future she had painted in brilliant, unwavering strokes. And yet now, that painting had been torn apart and replaced by a version of her life where she no longer existed. Strangers moved through the house with casual ownership, passing through halls she had once filled with laughter and quiet devotion. She imagined their fingers brushing against furniture she had chosen, their voices echoing in rooms where she had whispered dreams into the night. The ache in her chest pulsed with the rhythm of loss, steady and unrelenting. She had given him everything, not just love, but the kind of faith that builds futures. It was blind, unshaken, the belief of a woman who had never thought to doubt. She had stood beside him when no one else did, breathed life into his dreams, and carried his burdens in silence. And now he had erased her with the same ease he once used to kiss her forehead before bed. The signs had not screamed, they had whispered. A missed call here, a late return there, a scent not her own, subtle and cruel. Emails closed too quickly, names spoken too carefully. And through it all, she told herself it was stress, work, exhaustion, anything but the truth her heart had already begun to carry. What shattered her wasn't betrayal. It was the realization that she had always been temporary in his world. A placeholder, a phase. Someone convenient when he needed stability, but replaceable once the storm had passed. She didn't remember crying when the papers arrived. They came with surgical precision, clean, cold, and efficient. There had been no apology, no confrontation, just silence. As if her years beside him had been an oversight, a minor error corrected by legal terms and a notary seal. In the end, she walked away with nothing but her name. The house, the assets, even the friends who had once sipped wine beside her in manicured gardens, they drifted to his side like leaves drawn to a stronger wind. She left as the rain finally came, slicing through the sky with a kind of mercy. It soaked her as she walked without direction, blurring the city into streaks of light and shadow. Each step took her further from a past she had built and deeper into an unknown that terrified her. The weeks that followed passed without color. She drifted, not with freedom, but with inertia. Her body moved through days she couldn't remember, each morning waking her to a silence that screamed. She found work where she could no longer be the poised woman of charity galas and ribbon-cutting ceremonies, but a dishwasher in the back of a small eatery nestled between louder businesses. Her hands, once manicured and adorned, became raw from heat and soap. Her back ached, her feet swelled, and her pride, once fierce and intact, shrank into silence. There were no headlines, no sympathy. The world didn't pause to notice her fall, and maybe that was the worst of it, how easily she disappeared. But beneath the weight of that invisibility, something stirred. It began in moments between shifts when she stared at balance sheets she barely understood or scribbled ideas on napkins during her 10-minute break. She began to study to learn. The world that had once used contracts and clever wording to rob her began to make sense, bit by bit, line by line. She devoured books on finance, business strategy, and market psychology. She watched, listened, and mimicked. Her nights became arenas of self-taught warfare, battles fought not with fury, but with focus. She asked questions of anyone who would answer. She listened when others spoke. Slowly, the world began to crack open for her. What began as survival turned into something else: strategy, purpose. She started her first venture in the shadows of corporations that once ignored her. It was small, nearly invisible, a consulting service run from borrowed office space, built on her growing expertise and instinct for human nature. She didn't promise miracles. She delivered quiet, measurable success. And word spread. There was something about her unshakable, sharp, and almost surgical precision. She could see the failing gears in a business model like a surgeon finding the blockage in a heart. She didn't just fix numbers. She realigned vision, rewired failing ambition, and turned risk into reinvention. Her name grew in silence, whispered in rooms where strategy was written and futures decided. She became the ghost in the machine, the force behind resurrections that others deemed impossible. But success didn't heal, it rebuilt. Each milestone was another brick in a new foundation, one not built with his name or his world. She rose not to prove anything to him but to herself, that she had always been capable, that what was stolen had not defined her. Years passed in swift, sharpened strides, and then, like the final act in a play written by fate itself, the past returned. A proposal, one that would have once seemed unthinkable, landed on her desk. The company that had once belonged to her was now seeking her guidance. Their numbers were failing. Their leadership is shaken. The empire he had crafted with greed and arrogance was cracking. The meeting was set, the same office, the same seat, the same man. She arrived not in vengeance, but in power. The room didn't feel the same anymore. It had shrunk, somehow. The marble walls and leather chairs didn't intimidate her. They felt decorative, performative. And he, sitting behind that desk with eyes that scanned her like a question, seemed suddenly small. He wore the years poorly, more weight, less certainty. His voice, once filled with the arrogance of ownership, now carried the tremble of someone who knew he had miscalculated. She didn't flinch, not when he spoke, not when he offered terms laced with buried apologies. She saw through him. The flicker of recognition in his eyes wasn't for her strength, it was for the cost of underestimating her. She signed the deal, not for closure, for strategy. Because she wasn't here to reclaim the life he stole. She was here to dismantle it and rebuild it under her terms. The first step: dissolve the remnants of the past. Strip the company of its hollow rituals. Clean out the rot that had spread under his careless reign. Reassign power. Cut ties with those who enabled his rise and her fall. And still she felt no cruelty, no desire to watch him suffer. She didn't need to. She had already won. Outside, the city moved on its streets wet with another rain, its people lost in their own stories. But something was different now. The woman walking out of that building didn't carry the weight of what was lost. She carried the clarity of what was earned. The world had once told her she was nothing more than an accessory, a shadow behind a powerful man. But now, her name opened doors he could no longer enter. And as she disappeared into the city's evening hum, she realized that redemption didn't always arrive as justice. Sometimes it came as a quiet, undeniable truth. She had never been broken. She had only been becoming. Time didn't stop for triumph the way it did for tragedy. There were no grand announcements, no standing ovations. The world didn't pause to acknowledge her ascent. And that, she decided, was fitting. Her power wasn't meant for spectacle. It moved in quieter rhythms, forged in the unglamorous persistence of rebuilding what others had written off as lost. The dismantling of his company had begun with precision, but it evolved into something deeper. Each division, each policy, and each stagnant executive was examined and either sharpened or severed. She moved through boardrooms with calm clarity, her presence unsettling to those who once thrived on chaos and arrogance. They had been kings in his court, but under her leadership, they were simply men with fading titles and unearned legacies. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence was more commanding than any threat. She listened more than she spoke and made decisions before others even saw the choice. Her strategy was not built on revenge, it was built on reclaiming space. And slowly the story began to change. No longer was she the discarded wife of a corporate golden boy. She became something else entirely. A symbol, perhaps, of what happened when a woman refused to be erased. She saw it in the eyes of young assistants who followed her down hallways, in the whispered awe of colleagues watching her turn numbers into vision. They didn't just admire her, they believed in her. Because in her presence, they saw possibility. The past, though, never vanished completely. It hovered like a shadow, re-emerging in unexpected places. Old acquaintances resurfaced with cautious smiles. Some sought absolution, others sought proximity, and a few, still clinging to their fading relevance, tried to remind her of who she had once been. But she didn't owe them answers. Her absence from their world had taught her that. The man she had once loved remained in the periphery. His name still carried weight in circles she no longer moved in, but his influence was fading. Rumors stirred financial missteps, restless investors, and boardroom whispers of irrelevance. But she didn't follow them. His downfall was not her responsibility. And yet he lingered. Not in action, but in memory. It came in flashes, mornings when she paused at her reflection and wondered how much of herself had been shaped by what he left behind. Nights when the quiet pressed too heavily, when success felt like armor rather than liberation. Moments when she remembered love, not with longing, but with the gentle ache of what it had cost her. But pain, too, had evolved. It no longer dragged her down. It became part of her architecture, a scaffolding beneath the woman she had become. In time, the company he once owned was no longer a remnant of his legacy. It was hers. Renamed, restructured, reimagined. It stood not as a monument to what had been taken from her, but as a testament to what she had built without compromise. Still, even in victory, she remained a private force. She declined interviews and turned down features. Let others tell the story their way. The truth was hers to carry, not theirs to dissect. It wasn't until the gala, a fundraiser for women-led startups, that she allowed the public to see her again. The venue pulsed with light and elegance, every corner filled with the hum of ambition and admiration. She arrived without announcement, dressed not to impress but to reflect the quiet authority she had mastered. The crowd parted for her not out of fear, but reverence. Whispers followed her like a tide. That's her, the one who rebuilt from nothing, the one who walked away and came back stronger. And in the center of the crowd, standing beside a display of photographs showcasing women founders, she felt the shift. No longer did she feel the need to justify her presence. She belonged here, not because she fought for a seat at the table, but because she had learned to build her own. Later that evening, a familiar figure lingered near the entrance. He hadn't aged poorly, but time had dulled the sharpness of his edges. His suit was still tailored, his posture still proud, but something in his eyes betrayed the erosion. He watched her, not with malice or arrogance, but with a silence that bordered on recognition. She met his gaze, not as an ex-wife or an adversary, but as a woman who no longer needed to be defined in relation to him. There was no greeting, no confrontation, just a passing moment between two people who had once believed in a future that never came. And that was enough, because some things didn't require closure. Some endings were more complete in their silence. In the months that followed, her empire continued to grow not just in wealth but in impact. She began to fund ventures led by women who had been dismissed, sidelined, or underestimated. She created spaces for stories like hers to begin again, not in survival, but in sovereignty. Her days were long, her responsibilities vast, but her life no longer felt borrowed. It was hers in every way that mattered. She took time to travel, to sit in unfamiliar places, and listen to the world beyond ambition. She wrote not memoirs, but letters to herself. Records of the journey, fragments of the truth that only she needed to remember. In one such letter she wrote, "You are not what was taken from you. You are what you choose to become." And she believed it. Eventually, the storms inside her quieted. Not because they disappeared, but because she had learned how to live with them. They became part of her landscape, like scars that no longer hurt, but are still remembered. On the anniversary of the day she walked away, she stood once more beneath the sky. This time, the rain didn't fall. The air was still, heavy with possibility. The city lights flickered, but they no longer seemed indifferent. And she smiled, not because she had won, but because she had arrived. She had spent years rebuilding from the ashes others had left her in. But the fire hadn't destroyed her. It had forged her.